tonight's Zoom is all about how we can use our values or our company's value or our organisation's values as our compass, because values are the compass, our moral compass and our ethical compass, and they guide our thoughts and therefore our actions. So they are absolutely critical. And what's interesting is, first of all, to think where those values actually come from. And there's quite a lot of discussion about this. So just to go back, before we look into that, just to go back to what you've written in the chat. Yes, so on a daily basis and deciding which claims. Okay, so it's when you're thinking about what values are important, they're helping you to make decisions. So in a team where there's that value of how much money and time was allocated. Yes, so the values around time and money come into play, certainly, don't they? Yes, great. So where do our values come from? Now there's something that's called M-brain, which I don't know whether you've heard of that. It's multiple brains, and it's all about aligning with the head, the heart, and the gut. And that's what we're going to start with thinking about, and then we're going to move on to why values need to be more than just an add-on in the reception area. And thirdly, how do we become a values-based leader? So looking at this M-brain idea, this multiple brains idea, I think this is quite interesting. And it comes a lot from the work by Jansen Kramer, and he's written a couple of things in 2011 and 2015. The most famous being Become Your Best, Bring Values-Based Leadership to All You Do. So that's his book, if you're interested. And he really talks about saying that our values come from our heart and our emotions. So first of all, what do you think? Do you think that your values come from your heart and your emotions? Where do you think that they might come from? Now, I think there are so many ideas around this. You might think that they come from the environment that you're in, where you've grown up, from family, from friends, from peers. I think the answers there are multiple. What Kramer suggests is that we're using our intuition, we're using our thoughts, and we're using our emotions. And he refers to those as using our guts, that's what he says, our intuition, our heart for emotions, and head for our thoughts. So these are the three brains, which is quite an interesting way of thinking about it. And if you're interested in that, there's quite a lot written about that in terms of NLP and also this whole M-brain movement. So, but I want you to think about that for a moment and think of a time when things were going particularly well for you. So maybe you started a new project that you were really happy with. Maybe it was a piece of work that was really working well with your team. Everything's going well. And try to think, what were you thinking, feeling, and did it feel right to you? And I think most of us, when we think about that certain time, that certain project, that certain piece of work, we can feel that it felt instinctively right. The decisions were good. It felt like we were doing something worthwhile. We felt satisfied with what we were doing, and our thoughts were not in conflict with anything else. And this is what Kramer means by having these three brains all aligned. So it's a way of thinking about our emotions, our thoughts, and our instinct. And some people go further than that and thinking about identity, for example. So it might be that something feels right because it's how you see yourself. Now that can be positive or negative, obviously. You might want to change the way that you think about what you are or who you are or your role in something. And you may need to change that if your position changes, for example. So these things are not fixed. They can be changed and developed, which is very exciting. But when those things are aligned, then we can move forward really quite easily because the path becomes very clear. That compass is aligned. And what's interesting is that we use this in our language all the time. So have you ever said, for example, oh, I had a ball in the pit of my stomach, or a knot in my stomach? So Kramer would say that's you thinking instinctively something isn't right. So often if you're feeling really nervous and you can't explain that can be an instinctive feeling of something isn't right. It may be that you want to override that feeling, but that feeling itself is an instinctive one. You might say, for example, oh, my head was aching with all the thinking. So in fact, and this is not just in English, we see this across lots of languages as well. So it's something that's very interesting that they've done quite a lot of research into, thinking about these different brains and how we use it. And what can be very interesting is listening to what other people are saying about a project. So if somebody is talking about, for example, that they have that knot in their stomach, that may well be a little clue as to what the objection is. So it's not all the time, but it may be as it gives you a little clue. So listen out for that, both for yourself and also for other people. I think it's an interesting path. And in coaching, we do that quite a lot. We're listening out for that language. So now that's where we think our values come from. There might be other ideas that you have, so what have we got in the chat? Yeah, I think values come from your head. So from your thinking, and you need to actively engage in them. Yes. And I'm a bit confused with that one. Yes. So the interaction of the three, I think that's what you mean there. Okay, so those long-term values come from that interaction of those three things, yes. So moving on now to why values need to be more than just an add-on in the reception area. So I think that they have four main purposes. So the first one, I think, is quite obvious. It is about finding meaning and purpose and having that common mission. So a purpose possibly higher than making money, simply, but although that might be the main mission. But there may well be, and usually are, other values that come into play. So, for example, it might be that you want to help people realise their full potential, or you might want to make a big contribution to something. You might want to help people in a certain area of their lives. So that helps you to work out what the value is for you. And how do we do this? So we need to articulate those values that we believe will help us reach that mission. So for me, for example, with Blue Bottle Coaching, I would say, one of the mission is to help people realise their potential. So I think for most coaches that would be the case. But what isn't the case with all coaches is that we don't all share the same idea of how we're going to get there. So for me, my values in terms of my coaching are to do with connection, helping people to really connect, and helping people to contribute in the way that they want to do, and helping people really to grow. For me, family is very important, so that's why we have a family first business, and also respect. So respect in coaching means that the relationship between client and coach is respected at all times. So for me, those are the values that I feel are going to help my clients to reach their goals, and to help me reach my goals to help them. So values give us a path as well. They give us the how, not only the why. And that moves us on to the second point, which is that values help us to build an organisational culture. And they influence the way that we communicate. So if values define the how, they also define the why. So they help us to define what's really important, but they also help us to work out how to get there. So that means that we know how to interact, how to communicate, how to have those difficult conversations. Every interaction, both positive and negative, can be measured against these values. And another researcher who's very interesting, and she's only very recently come onto the stage, as it were. She hasn't got anything published that I could find, but I found an interview with her, and she's called Heidi Askin, and she's working in Paris in a French company and doing some research at the same time. And what she suggests doing is looking at what she calls the shadows of values. So values, she argues, have strengths, but they also have shadows. And she says that we need to look at both to look for the tensions. So if I can give you an example of that, for example, if your value is quality, so you want to produce something that is of high quality. So on the positive side, you're therefore maybe valuing excellence, for example. But the shadow might be might be that then you find it difficult for something to be not perfect, or you find it difficult to experiment, because if your value is excellence and quality, it's going to be difficult to produce something that's not that. So you can see how that's the shadow of that value. Another example might be, a value might be to care for the people in your organization. So the positive side of that might be that there is humane people management. People can have time off easily if they're sick, etc., etc. But the shadow of that might be that people have difficulty having difficult conversations or challenging conversations. So that's the shadow, or a possible shadow. And what she suggests is that when we look at values, we need to really look at the tension between those. And I think that's very, very interesting. So I think, just to recap, values show us what our right decision is going to be for our business and for ourselves possibly. But it also shows us possibly where things could go wrong. So we need to keep that in mind. Now, Heidi Askin also goes on to talk a lot about how values can build resilience in an organisation. And for me, I think this is the most interesting part of values, particularly at the moment in the COVID situation. So she suggests thinking about resilience with two facets. So firstly, resilience as the ability to absorb difficulties. So for example, if a company loses a big order, they maybe have the financial strategies in place to make up for that. Or it might also be the ability to adapt. So in that case, it might be to find a new market or to design a new product. So she suggests that we need to think of resilience in these two ways. Firstly, as a way to absorb any shock, and secondly, can we adapt? And she argues that most organisations either have a default towards one or the other. More rigid organisations tend to default towards absorbing, and more, technology organisations, companies will look at adaptability and they will invest in that. And she says the risk is we can sometimes default rather than developing both sides. So how do values help with that? Well, what she says, for those to work, we need to have our compass absolutely clear, because for both of those strategies, whether you're absorbing the shock or whether you're trying to adapt, you need to know what's important for your organisation. Because when you know what's important, you can make decisions quickly and fairly easily, and you know that the buy-in from your teams, from your staff, is probably going to be quite high if they've already bought into the values. And that's the big if, obviously. So I can give you a little example of that. So with my own example of the Balfour School of English, so our value is quality. So continuing an excellent service when we went into lockdown last year was our priority. So in fact, in terms of being resilient, what we did was that we absorbed by switching to Zoom literally overnight, but we also adapted because I added in extra free classes to keep people engaged. So that wasn't absorbing the shock. That was adapting and finding a new way to try to keep that excellent quality, but also to keep clients in the system, as it were. So there were two sides of that reaction. So it's quite interesting to think about how we're making decisions, how organisations are making decisions, and how values can really help us be resilient, which is of course increasingly important. This year has shown us why, and I see no reason why that's going to change in the very near future. So it's a really important one. The fourth part of this is that values help us to understand conflict. Because when personal and organisational values collide, we can have a bit of a problem. So if, for example, we have, as one of you mentioned, that the value of an organisation is to make lots of money, and if your personal value is to make a contribution, those two may work well together, but there may well be conflict. Now, I've looked for literature on this and not found any, nothing at all, but I have found looking at different goals as something that's maybe similar. And I think the same could be applied here. So there needs to be an awareness of private and individual values versus organisational values and the tensions that this may create. And I think when we do have tensions in a team, particularly around issues around resilience, about how we're going to absorb or adapt, often we can trace it back to these differences in values and where they're not actually aligned. So when we do have a conflict situation, let's choose to check out those differences in values as a way of trying to negotiate, trying to compromise, and trying to move forward. So how do you become a values-based leader? So I've got 4 quick ways for you. Well, they're not quick, but they're relatively short in terms of the advice. So the first one is to walk the talk, and I think this is probably the most important. We've all seen leaders that are role models, and if they value integrity, for example, that's what they do. They walk the talk. And not only in their work, but also in their everyday lives. So they tell stories, they show that is what they're doing. So walk the talk, allow yourself to be known, allow your values to be known, share your values. This is really important. If you don't share them, nobody's going to know. Secondly, when we start defining success based on values, then this can really change organisations as well. So if, for example, in Blue Bottle Coaching, our value is having a family-friendly business or a family-first business, well, part of looking at our successes during the year should look at, well, how well do people feel supported in terms of their family life, in terms of being able to have time when they need it for families. So we need to measure our success against our values. Don't leave them up on the wall. We need to measure them. We need to evaluate what the impact is and whether that does have an impact. Thirdly, I think self-awareness is the most difficult one, but it's really key. Without that, we can't put our own values in place. We can't be a values-based leader. So we need to think about what our actions are saying about our values, what our thoughts are saying about our values. Where there's conflict, as I've already said, where there's conflict, how is that showing up? Why is that showing up? Is this a problem with values, or is it something else? So I think within this idea of self-awareness, it needs a lot of humility, a lot of discussion, a lot of sharing, because values also change and people change. So in that constant discussion, we can't do it once. We can't have one meeting on values and forget about it. It needs to be constant. It needs to be constant with our customers, with our clients, with our colleagues, with our peers, everywhere. It needs to be constant. So to do that, we need a lot of energy and commitment, and it needs to be genuine. I think we can't pretend to have a value that we don't have. It needs to be genuine. It needs to be authentic, and we need to think about that heart, head, gut, and make sure that that is aligned. So what are the benefits to leaders personally? Well, there's loads of them. For a start, if you think back to that first big question that I asked you, when you think back to that time when you were happy and fulfilled, that's the feeling you get when you're aligned with your values, when your work is aligned with your values. Operating in that calm and very confident flow is another side effect, if you like. Your decision making is better. It's clearer. It's quite simple, because if you're clear on what your values are, then you know where you're going. If you're clear on what your values are and your organizational values, then you can help to bring people on board. It doesn't mean what comes next is going to be easy, but it should help to eliminate options that are not going to be right for you. And how do your team benefit? Well, they benefit because if you're clear, they're going to be clearer on what they need to do. If you're clear, your communication is going to be better, your decisions are going to be clearer, and then you're giving people space to be much more creative if they understand the purpose, if they understand the values. So recruitment is easier. And I've been speaking to quite a few leaders recently who have told me they're no longer recruiting for talent, they're recruiting on values and potential. And I think this is one area that's very interesting. However, I would say there is a possible downside to this. We also don't want to just recruit clones of ourselves. We do need some diversity as well. So it's down to self-awareness, being really aware that we can have differences in opinions and differences in our ideas of how we're going to get somewhere, even if we share basically the same values. Along those lines, we could give the example of excellence, for example. So if excellence is your value, well, imagine in your work, there must be a million ways to interpret that. So that the value can be the same, but the interpretation, the route, may well be very, very different. So now there's a little bit of work for you, which is based on Steve Payne's book. So Steve Payne was the guy who I did my coach training with, and he's written this book. And your prize, the special prize tonight, is going to be a copy of this book that I will send to somebody. I will announce how you have to how you can participate in the competition. But that is going to be your prize, and it's an excellent book because it's very, very practical. So it's called My 31 Practices, and it's all about how to really harness the power of values, not just in the workplace, in fact not at all really in the workplace, but in life generally. So it's an excellent book. So we're going to just take a little bit from here tonight, just to do a little exercise together. So what I would like you to do, just on a piece of paper in front of you, I would like you to identify some values that are really important to you. So these values are things that motivate you and guide you. So just make a quick note of them. Don't think about it too much. Usually these things come quite quickly. And these are things that can't really generally be taken away from you. So it might be, something like friendship. You can't take it away, as it were. It's a concept. So identify some values. It doesn't matter how many you've got there. Just 2 or 3 just to look at. And now I'd like you to think of a time when you were very happy, and we'll do it in the work context. Think of a time when you were very happy, very fulfilled and satisfied. So which of your values were being fulfilled in that moment, would you say? So if you have a look at your list, you may need to add a few if they're not on your list. And just give me a thumbs up when you've found at least one value that was being fulfilled in that moment. Great. Okay. So choose either that one or whichever ones are the most important to you in your work, and work out why it's so important to you. What does that bring you? So when you've worked out why it's so important, and I realise I'm not giving you a lot of time, you might want to come back to this. What does it look like when that's in place? What does it really look like? What are the everyday actions that are required to put it into action? So I'll give you an example for me. So contribution is really important to me. So contribution is a value that's really important to me. So that means for me, in terms of my everyday behaviour, it means that when I turn up to coach or to teach, I am fully present. Because I know I cannot contribute something unless I am fully present. There is no point me turning up half asleep. I have to be fully present. I need to be full of energy, or at least switched on with a strong coffee if required. But I need to be 100% there. I can't be 10% somewhere else. I have to be absolutely there. So that's the behaviour that I can identify that's going to help me to put that value into place. Another example is connection. So connection is very important for me. So this means that for me, one of the behaviours that I want to have in place is that ideas are fully shared with my team. So we're a team of 2 at the moment, and I really try to make sure, for example, that we have time to discuss. So I would prefer that we have more time to discuss so that we can share our ideas, that we can discuss and that we can disagree freely. And for that, we need time, and it needs to be in the right kind of atmosphere. So that connection, that's one of the ways. There are so many ways actually for both of those, but those are just two behaviours that I would identify. So once you've identified that, when we've stopped recording, we'll have a quick discussion about that. So I'm just going to tell you also a little bit about the prize tonight. So if you would like to win the book, and I will send it tomorrow, all I would like you to do is to write a little review of tonight's session, either here in the chat or on the Facebook page, and I will ask Hannah or Olivia to pick out a number, depending on how many there are, and they completely randomly, and the winner will get a copy of the book. So there you go. So a quick review. Thank you very much. That would be wonderful. Okay, just a quick bit of advertising for next week. So we've got our 5-day Leading with Courage masterclass, which is going to be in French next week. So this is a first, and the whole week will be in French. There will be sessions every night, starting at 8 o'clock British time, 9 o'clock French time, for about 45 minutes. And we're looking at leading with courage. So what it means, how it can change your whole approach to leadership, what mindset you need to develop, and what it looks like in practice in your everyday interactions. And what's interesting about this course is that I actually do it using pieces of art. So we're using pieces of art to discuss these concepts, and I think it makes it a little bit different. So do come along. It's completely free. If you'd like to sign up, all you need to do is sign on the link and or send me an email, and I'll make sure you are on the list. So that will be really exciting. Okay, there is no Zoom next week because it's the live launch, but there is a very special one the week after with Anne Lukens, and she is an expert on conflict management, and she is an expert who has worked in the Middle East and with many companies, and she is absolutely amazing. We are so lucky to have her as a guest on one of our Tuesday Zooms, so do come along and be part of that discussion. She's going to do a presentation. She's then going to take questions and talk to us about her work in conflict management, and she's been doing this for 20-30 years. She really is, and she is internationally renowned, so do come along, don't miss that. So for tonight I'm going to say goodbye to everybody who's listening on the replay, and we're going to continue our discussion here. So good night, everybody.